pre-war population of Rafah, the southernmost city of the Gaza Strip, sharing a border with Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, was 170,000. Today, 7 months after Israel launched its war on Gaza, as many as 1.5 million people are living in Rafah. Many of them are camped on the streets and beaches, while others are crammed into filthy, overcrowded makeshift shelters. Rafah is now a gigantic refugee camp, says the Norwegian Refugee Council. According to a doctor who served in Rafah, the city is a closed jail. Medics are struggling to supply even basic aid and prevent the outbreak of diseases. According to ActionAid, every single person in Gaza is now hungry, and people have just 1.5 to 2 liters of unsafe water per day to meet their needs. It is in this Rafah Israel is carrying out its latest offensive. Hello everyone, this is Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs Editor. Rafah has always been a flashpoint in the Israel-Palestine conflict, given its territorial proximity to Egypt. After the 1948 Arab-Israel War, Rafah came under Egyptian rule along with other parts of the Gaza Strip. Tens of thousands of Palestinians who were displaced from their homes when the State of Israel was created were settled in Gaza. During the Suez Crisis, Rafah came under direct attack when the Israeli troops were marching towards Sinai Peninsula through Gaza. On November 12, 1956, the IDF raided a refugee camp in Rafah, killing at least 111 Palestinians, which came to be known as the Rafah Massacre. After the Six-Day War of 1967, the entire Gaza, including Rafah, came under Israel's direct military occupation. Israel would retain its tight control over the enclave until 2005. After the latest war began on October 7, 2023, Israel ordered over 1 million Palestinians living in the northern Gaza to evacuate. Most of them fled their homes and moved to southern cities such as Khan Yunis and Rafah. When Khan Yunis was attacked, there was another flight of refugees further towards the south. Today, the lion's share of Rafah's population are internally displaced Palestinians. Before Israel launched the Rafah offensive, there were dramatic developments. The United States had warned Israel against launching a full-scale invasion of Rafah, arguing that such an attack would kill more Palestinian civilians. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel has vowed that Israel would go ahead with the plan to invade Rafah, defying international pressure, warnings and pleas. But Mr. Netanyahu is also under pressure to bring the remaining hostages back. Israel says 128 hostages abducted on October 7 are still in Hamas's captivity, though many of them are feared dead. There are growing protests in Israel asking the government to strike a deal with Hamas to bring the hostages back. Israel and Hamas, helped by mediators such as the United States, Egypt, Qatar, had held multiple rounds of talks in Cairo for a ceasefire deal. Reports in Egyptian and Saudi media suggested that the mediators had proposed a three-phase deal that would see the release of all hostages and Palestinian prisoners and eventually bring the war to an end. In the first phase, Israel was expected to cease fire for 40 days and free Palestinian prisoners in return for the release of 33 hostages by Hamas. In the second phase, the ceasefire would be extended by 42 more days, while all the remaining living hostages would be released. The third phase proposals were the most contentious. Israel wanted Hamas to release the bodies of all hostages, and Hamas wanted a comprehensive, lasting ceasefire and full withdrawal of the Israeli troops from Gaza. Israel has said no to both Hamas demands. Israeli troops have been deployed in northern and central Gaza, effectively carving the northern tip of the strip as the buffer zone between Israel proper and Gaza's population. If the Israeli troops withdraw from Gaza, Israeli officials say Palestinians as well as Hamas militants would return to the areas close to the Israeli border. And if Israel agrees to a lasting ceasefire, the remaining Hamas battalions would survive. When Israel launched the war on October 7th, it made its twin objectives public: dismantle Hamas and release the hostages. 7 months after the war, in which roughly 35,000 Palestinians have been killed, Israel has not met either of these objectives. One practical solution to the hostage crisis is to strike a deal with Hamas. But Hamas would release the hostages only in return for a lasting ceasefire. And if Israel agrees for a ceasefire, Hamas would survive. This is the dilemma Benjamin Netanyahu is facing. Earlier, Biden administration officials had said Hamas was the major stumbling block for a ceasefire. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, for example, stated on May 4th that the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. But on May 6th, Hamas's Doha-based leader Ismail Haniyeh said that the group accepted the ceasefire proposal suggested by the mediators in Cairo. The Hamas announcement came hours after the Israeli Defense Forces ordered the evacuation of at least 100,000 Palestinians from Rafah. Mr. Netanyahu's government immediately rejected the Hamas offer, saying it did not meet Israel's core demands. The Prime Minister later said Israel would never agree to end the war in Gaza as part of a deal with Hamas. Mr. Netanyahu's tough line on Rafah has created tensions in Israel's ties with the United States. Earlier, President Biden himself had said that a full-scale attack on Rafah without a proper plan to protect civilians would be a red line. The United Nations has repeatedly warned that any attack on the overcrowded Rafah would lead to a humanitarian catastrophe. The WHO says it would lead to a bloodbath. If Mr. Netanyahu abandons the plan to attack Rafah and cuts a deal with Hamas for hostages, his government could fall as his far-right allies such as Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have already warned against such a move. If he goes ahead with the plan to invade Rafah, more Palestinian civilians would be killed. Israel would further be isolated globally and tensions would rise in ties with the United States. But Mr. Netanyahu doesn't seem to bother. If Israel has to stand alone, it will stand alone, he said on May 10th, less than a month after American, British, French and Jordanian defense systems, along with the IDF, shot down most of the drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles launched by Iran towards Israel. Thank you very much. For more such videos, please subscribe to The Hindu.